Hello and welcome to Prime Time in conversation with Sandie Okoro. My name's Camilla Macpherson and I'm Head of Secretariat. Thank you all for joining us today. To start with some housekeeping, the session is being recorded and will be distributed later. Attendees who continue to participate are taken to have consented to the recording. Attendees are muted and have their video turned off. If you have a question or comment, we'd love to hear from you. Please use the Q&A function to get in touch. It can be helpful to include your name and affiliation. I'd like to thank FTI Consulting, McCann Fitzgerald and Travis Smith for sponsoring this series of Prime Time, and LexisNexis for helping with promotion. Let me now introduce Elizabeth Stong, who's moderating this session and who will then introduce Sandie. Elizabeth is a judge of the United States Bankruptcy Court, Eastern District of New York. She's just completing her second term as a member of the P.R.I.M.E Finance Management Board and now joining P.R.I.M.'s advisory board. Amongst many, many other things, she is a trustee of the Practicing Law Institute, an advisory board member of the American Bar Association Center for Innovation, co-chair of the ABA Business Law Section Pro Bono Committee, an advisory committee member of Columbia University Committee on Global Thought, and a P.R.I.M.E finance expert. Elizabeth, let me hand over to you.
Camilla, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us. Welcome to Chambers here in the Eastern District of New York. My name is Elizabeth Stong. I am thrilled today to be our moderator for a really special opportunity for P.R.I.M.E Finance and for our audience. And selfishly, I'll say for me, because you're going to get to hear from one of my favorite people, one of my heroes in the law, a dear friend and a legend in the law, Sandie Okoro. Sandie doesn't need an introduction, but I'm going to give her one anyway. And I could tell you that she is a leader in the arts. And I could point out that she is the inaugural chair of the UK-based charity WOW, Women of the World Festivals. I could mention that she is on the board of the Royal Shakespeare Company. I could point out that she is a marathoner and has run the London Marathon more than once. But for today's purposes, I should probably begin by telling you that she is the Senior Vice President General Counsel for the World Bank Group. That's the organization that has the mission to eradicate poverty globally. Not a small task, nor an unimportant one. She's also Vice President for Compliance at the bank. And critically important these days, she's chair of the World Bank Group Task Force on Racism. She's a British national. She's the first Black woman to hold these roles. She is the principal advisor and spokesperson for the bank in these capacities in all legal matters. And that's a pretty big and full plate. Before she was at the World Bank, she held other general counsel, chief legal officer positions, including at HSBC Global Asset Management. She's deputy general counsel at HSBC as well, global general counsel at Barings. She has unsurprisingly been recognized far and wide, not only with medals at the end of those marathons, I'm sure, but also as an honorary bencher of Middle Temple in the United Kingdom, listed as one of the upstanding 100 leading ethnic minority executives, top 20 general counsel by the FT, Britain's 5th most influential person of African and African Caribbean heritage by Power List. I just want to meet 1 through 4. That's all I can say. I guess if they don't hold a candle to Sandie. Anyway, you get the idea. It's an incredible privilege to have her with us. I know her. I'm so fortunate to know her as a dear friend and former colleague on the P.R.I.M.E Finance Board. She's a force of nature. She's an inspiration. Sandie, thank you for making time for us. It is so good to see you. Can I just say again, tell us your story. Looking back, how would you describe your path to your position, all these positions, but in particular, Senior Vice President, General Counsel of the World Bank? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. I've been looking forward to this all day, and it's just, and actually all week, maybe all month even, to see you again, Elizabeth. You're a dear friend. We have such good chats together. So I'm going to have to remind myself that other people are listening, because it's going to feel very much like...
No, this is just between us, I'm sure. Recorded with an audience, but just between us.
So, you know, my story, when I look back on it now, I realize, you know, the depth and breadth of it, but at the time I was living it. And I just want to make that clear. So I didn't really set out to be where I am today, but I did start off with ambition. And that ambition was always, it was actually to be a judge. And I know some people will have heard this story before, but I will repeat it because I think it means a lot. And when I was about 7 or 8 and I was at primary school and I was being asked, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I said, I want to be a judge. And I was told that little black girls from Balham, which is where I lived at the time, don't become judges. And sounds shocking today, wasn't shocking at the time. And I think that was my teacher trying to manage my expectations of reality. And when I look back now, and I can you imagine if I said, actually, you know what, instead I'll be Senior Vice President and General Counsel of the World Bank Group. I don't think she would have said. That's a more realistic expectation. So I grew up at a time when expectation of women of color was not great. And it really didn't matter what your intelligence was. It was just, you know, that you weren't represented in society in that way at that level. But I thought, you know, that's not going to be my story. I just knew it wasn't going to be my story. My story was going to be what I made of it. And I decided then and there not to see the obstacles, but to see the opportunities, however they may be. And I thought, well, if they're not any then I'll be the first, so be it. I will not be scared of that. And of course, that wasn't actually true, but I didn't know. And so I just decided that then and there, because I always wanted to be a lawyer from a young age, that I was no way anyone was going to shake me off that path, and I was going to go for it. And I did. So I did everything you need to do in terms of the academics, which are not easy, by the way. And when I mentor young people, I say you have to get past the academics. It's a very high level of academics to enter the profession. But when you do, it is so worth it. But please go into it with a passion for making the world a better place, with a passion for justice, with a passion for the rule of law, with a passion for access to justice for everybody. And I think we all do that. It's a vocation for all of us. So I did what I did, and I ended up being a lawyer in the city, which again, very unusual place for women, very unusual place for women of color. I loved doing that work. It was very challenging, changed every day, and built up an expertise that saw me made general counsel of various places. And then one day the World Bank came knocking at the door. And at that point, when, via a headhunter, I said, no, I can't possibly do that job. It's way too big for someone like me. I couldn't possibly do it, and counted myself out. And then I took a while to think about it and thought maybe I should just let the World Bank decide whether or not it's too big a job for me. So I put my hat back in the ring, and the rest is history. And it is an amazing job. It is an amazing mission. We see, that sign when we walk in. Well, we did about a year and a half ago, but when we get back to walking into the building in DC about, a world free of poverty. And that is what I'm trying to do. And using my legal skills to do that is amazing. And when I started off, I wanted to be a civil rights lawyer. I ended up being a city lawyer. But I feel I've come back to that pull and that passion, and it's just absolutely amazing. And I have pushed on no matter what because of my passion for the law, my passion for justice, and my passion for my profession.
You know, there's so much wisdom and so much insight in what you say. I sometimes tell my students who are law students working with federal judges and who are seeing lots of opportunities, but maybe more obstacles than not between themselves and those opportunities. For goodness sake, don't reject yourself.
Yes.
Right? Don't reject yourself. You have to be in it to win it, people
exactly.
say. It's such an inspiring story that you tell, and I hope and expect that it resonates maybe in a deep and quiet way with many in our audience, including, I'll say, my own interns, our P.R.I.M.E finance interns, from whom we'll be hearing later. How much of this do you think can be planned and foreseen, and how much is serendipity, and how do those two things work together?
I think it's a little bit of both, but you can plan much more than you think you can. So one of the first things when you first start off is you look at others and you think, I can never do that, it's too difficult, but what you've got to remember is all about potential when you start off. And I realize this now, that, particularly when you leave school, high school, and go to university, and then you go through your path, is that those people who choose you for the next path at that stage are looking for potential, because you actually don't have any skill yet. You don't realize that until later, but it's about the potential to develop that skill and to become a great lawyer. And you haven't reached that yet, but others will see it in you. And so one of the first things I think is trusting when others see it in you. You may not feel it yourself. You know, you may look at that and think, I can't do that. No, so-and-so over here, James and Jane and, you know, Hassan, etc., are cleverer than me, right? And they're smarter than me and they're getting better results than I am. But we all reach our peak at different times. And unfortunately, if those three have peaked right then and you haven't peaked yet, you're going to actually, you have more potential. So I think it's all about believing in your own potential to start off with. I always say to people when I mentor them, if you had all the resources in the world, all the time in the world, and all the help in the world, could you do it? Now, I know there's some things I could never do with all the resources, all the time in the world, all the help. I could never run as fast as Usain Bolt. So there's no point trying. But there are some things you can always do if you really want to do it. So trust in yourself is the first thing. And I always say, set a path and set it so high that it looks as if you can't achieve it. So at least, you know, if you're heading towards it, you've stopped for a while to have a rest, or you're just going in another direction, but don't be directionless. And really stretch yourself. Don't think about the next job, because that's easy and that's actually easy to attain. Think about 3 or 4 jobs above that, and think about what you really want to do and how you're going to make a difference. And I guess it comes from my own wanting to be a judge. Am I a judge? No. Am I anywhere close to being a judge? No.
I'm going to say not yet, but that's
not
just
yet,
me.
Not yet. Still an ambition of mine. But I don't feel that sense of failure because I haven't achieved it. So set your goals really, really high, and things will happen to you along the way, and you'll think, oh my goodness, I can't. There are times when I've really wished for something simpler to do in life than this complicated life I've given myself, right? And I think, oh, I wish I could have a job where I don't have an in-tray and I don't carry problems into the next day. But actually that's life, and it's a privilege to do this job as a lawyer. It's a privilege. So set your sights high, set your goals high, set them to unattainable heights. What's going to put you on the cover of Time magazine as a lawyer? That's what you should be setting your sights for, right? And then everything else is a ladder to that in between. You get there, maybe not, doesn't really matter, but you're going to try and make a difference. You're going to try and make, I hope, the world a better place. Life happens on the way. Life happens on the way. That's all part of this. But I'm a single mother. I've got a child with a disability, as you know, etc., etc. And so there've been these things that have been thrown in my direction that I've had to dodge a few bullets, etc. But notwithstanding that, I've kept going. So I think the other thing that's a secret sauce, Elizabeth, is resilience that we all need. And I think we all know what that means now in this post-COVID environment.
So there's so much of that. There's so much wisdom and insight packed into so much of that. Your current job, mine as well, these are not entry-level jobs, but they're destinations. And the more and more that you can appreciate, I think, at every stage in your career, whether at Wall Street, the city, the law, finance, civil rights, whatever it is, that there are destinations that are appropriate to keep on your horizon and fixed in your sights that are not where you are now. And of course, they're not where you are now. I had an experience years ago in practice where I had been asked to take on a very important role on very short notice in a big lawsuit, a takeover case. And I actually went to the partner after the team meeting and said, oh, I'm sure that this person or that person, I did what you just said don't do. I'm sure one of those people would do a better job at the big expert deposition because I've never done one of those. And the partner looked at me, I'm grateful to him to this day, and said, oh, you'll be fine. Was there something you wanted to talk about? He had more faith in me than I had in me.
Yeah.
Don't be that person, right?
Yeah.
Or put it in the shelf if you find yourself going that way. If you find yourself going that way, do you have mental tricks or devices that you say, okay, I see it. I see that doubt. Enough with you, doubt, or I own you, doubt. You're going to make me better, not worse. I mean, how do you say you're going in to meet the, I don't know, say it's UN General Assembly week and you have a meeting with several treasury secretaries of G7 countries. I'm making this up. I imagine this could happen. How do you get in the mindset for that and quiet that little voice is telling you, oh.
You know, this is a very good example, because when I first started at the bank, I started meeting prime ministers and presidents
Of course.
and you know, chief justices and etc. That I was not used to mixing in those, you know, elevated circles. So of course you're nervous. Of course you're thinking, can I do it? But like everything else, as you said, it's a destination. You built up to it. That's what you've got to remember. You've learned everything you need to learn at that stage. And you have to trust yourself. And you have to trust yourself that you can do it. And all of it is fear, right? You know, there is, you know, fear could be forget everything and rise, or it can be forget everything and run. Which one is it? You're going to run or you're going to rise? And so, you know, fear is a good thing to have. It's a self-regulating mechanism. But it shouldn't stop you doing things. And some risk taking is not a bad idea in that sense. And to push yourself and to really stretch yourself. If you stay, you know, I loved your example of a destination. If you don't have a destination, you're standing still. You're not going anywhere, right? And that destination has to be a stretch. And even for you and I, and where we've reached in our professional lives, there's still a stretch out there. We still want it.
Every day.
Every day. And I'm sure your first day in the courts, for example, I'm sure your knees were knocking, and you're just like everyone else. You're like, I don't know if I can do this. They're going to find out I'm a fraud. And then years later, you're comfortable. You realize how it works. That happens to everybody. But you have to relax into it. Enjoy the fear for a while. It's there to make sure you're not arrogant and you're not, you know, whatever. But don't let it put you off anything. And let me tell you a story, if I may, of something that really changed my thinking on this. And there was a time when things weren't going very well in my life, just lots of everything was happening. And I was walking with my son down the road. And in the UK, we have these sort of plastic dogs that are about that high that you put money in, guide dogs for the blind, that sort of thing. And my son was just playing. He was 3 or 4 at the time in front of this dog, and he was going, come on, dog, bring it on, dog. And I'm thinking, come on, I want to go home. I'm late. I've got so much to do. And you are having a fight with a plastic dog. And I suddenly thought, wait one moment. I had like a light bulb moment, as they say, when I thought, you know what, maybe I'm having a fight with a plastic dog in the things that I think are important that are holding me back. And actually, it's just a plastic dog. And I can handle anything if I choose to, if I just look at it as a plastic dog. And so my motto has been, whatever's been thrown my way, I'm like, come on, bring it on, dog, bring it on. I want that on my gravestone, bring it on, dog, because it changed my view of things. And it changed my view of looking at everything as a privilege, not a problem. The first thing is, A, I'm alive, so it's a privilege to have this problem because I'm alive. And secondly, it's a privilege to have this problem because I have a profession, I have a career, I have all of these things, a family, all these things I wanted. And whatever's problematic at the time, it's a privilege. And that's when I started to think of looking at problems in a different way, as I'm privileged to have this problem, because you could be in a different situation where you're not. And once you change that, you start to solve the problem as well. And you start to see things you don't normally see. So my bring it on dog attitude is, oh, give me another problem. That's not big enough. Give me another one. And that changes your view. And you start to put things in different compartments. And you start to fear certain things less. And in fact, you start to take on bigger things. Because what's the worst you can do?
That's it.
What's the worst you can do?
I say this to people who are considering putting their name in for appointment to the federal bench. What's the worst thing that happens if you put your name in? You don't become a federal judge.
Which
what
is
happens
exactly
if you don't put your
already.
name in? I guarantee you, you won't become.
You won't become. Yeah,
judge.
exactly.
So it is a sometimes it feels like a curse, but it's deeply a blessing to have so many things that you want to do, that you can do, that at a certain point, maybe on your path, you're privileged to be able to do, that can really make a difference. It's a good problem, not a bad problem. It sometimes feels like a problem. It can create challenges for getting the laundry done, but it's still a good problem. So just to make the most recent list of your sort of resume positions, they'd be, of course, your huge role at the World Bank and General Counsel, but that's just a piece of the picture. I would love to hear more about the Task Force on Racism. And of course, there's the mission, a Global General Counsel. In each of those, especially in the private sector. My guess from my own time in the private sector, especially, is that you looked to the left, you looked to the right, you didn't see a whole lot of people that looked like you or used the same bathroom you did when we took breaks. So it's maybe it's clear, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on what kind of a challenge that is. Does it ever create an opportunity to be that person in the room that everyone's going to remember because there aren't many others like you? I'd love to know your thoughts.
That's always an opportunity. So you've got to remember that, because they're looking, and the best thing you can do is be yourself, right? Because that's almost the hardest thing to do when you don't fit in the first place, just because you don't look like everybody else in the room or sound like everybody else in the room. Our instinct is to fit in. We get that, I think, as teenagers, and it never leaves us. You know, we want to fit in with the cool group or whatever that is. But actually, what we always value is individualism. We always have. And so that being your authentic self is really important. And I didn't really have much choice, because I just looked different to others. And so I decided to approach it differently, and to think differently, and to challenge differently. Never to question my own intellectual ability, though, because I'd already proved that academically. I didn't need to question that. And I would say that to all lawyers out there. Once you've passed those academic hurdles, you don't need to question that. What you need to then learn are different skill sets, analytical skill sets, thinking on your feet, putting complicated issues into simple terms. Those are things you will learn as you go along. But listen very much when you're in meetings, and don't be afraid to contribute and open your mouth. It can be the simplest thing. It can be asking the simplest questions. But don't be afraid to be in that room. You own that room as much as anybody else does. You would deserve that seat as much as anybody else does. And there may be people who have 10, 20 years more experience than you, but you will get there in time. But you can contribute at that particular point. So I do think it has been, I used it to my advantage, let's put it that way. I realized I was in a unique position. I chose not to see it as a disadvantage. Because if you go in and you see it as a disadvantage, it will be. If you think there's that chip on its shoulder, it will be there. If you go and think there's no disadvantage, there's only advantage in this, it's advantage. Because you can change the mood of the room by your own mood, right? And we all know that when we're in meetings and when things are difficult. And if you're the one that is the problem solver that helps people get over a hurdle, then you're always appreciated and always wanted in the room. And whatever tensions, prejudices there might have been, they dissipate as soon as you actually make a contribution. It's not always easy. I'm not saying it's easy. And I'm not saying that at all in any way, but I'm talking about how you make it easy for yourself in that room. And don't worry about anybody else in that room. And, you know, my mum used to say, don't let anybody's poor opinion of you be your poor opinion of yourself.
I like that.
I think it's very important.
Is there any additional piece of this that would be applicable in the business world, in the world of high finance, in the world of the city of London, Wall Street, something like that? Because it's so much of this makes so much sense. Frankly, I feel like we could sing a duet on some of these points. But I think sometimes there's a sense that, yes, well, that's true in the world generally, but this isn't the world generally. This is, you know, this is Barings, this is HSBC. I'm just taking them from your resume, nothing specific there. This is the law firms I spent my career at, Cravath, this is Wilkie Farr. My own experience has been, in a way, and shared from time to time, you're going to be remembered. You might as well make that a good fact.
Exactly.
So I don't think any of this is diluted because it's in the business context. If anything, hopefully that's a setting where it would be all the more true, because people are going to be focusing on results as much as anything else. It just should be a nature of that setting. And it's development in banking and finance. This is what I'll say your day job, your day and night job. This is what your enterprise has been. But this has been something we've talked about since we first met, on kind of a parallel, intertwining, I know that's not possible, track. You've had this deep involvement in the arts.
Yes.
And I'm curious to know how that fits in, how it complements the work you've done in your private sector and now in your World Bank life. and how you'd encourage people to think about the fact that they may have more than one really deep interest, passion, commitment. Tell us about that.
Well, I've always had a passion for the arts. Since I was very young and first went to the theatre for the first time, I was just blown away. And so the theatre, visual arts, cinema, everything, just the whole medium of it and production of it, I have been fascinated by and think it's so important. And one of the key things, I think, Elizabeth, is that the arts holds a mirror up to society. We've probably learned more about the world through literature, through plays, through artwork, telling us something that we are, that we probably ever could through reading a lot of books. So there have been some seminal things that have happened. I remember when I was growing up in the UK, there was a TV program called Roots, which was about slavery. And it was broadcast in the UK, I think in either the late 70s or early 80s, I forget. But it's
based on Alex Haley's book, yes.
That's right, a 6-part series. Suddenly, it was the first time they showed slavery in a really raw, horrible way, in a mainstream way. And I remember everybody was at school, people were discussing it with me and opening up to these kind of things, saying, I didn't realize it was so bad. And that impact, then that's one of the things that thought, wow, the visual arts are something else, more than anybody could read in a book. And so we must look at this in parallel. And I'm a great fan of Shakespeare's, and Shakespeare's almost told every combination of story you can think of. And you look at some of these speeches that I think some of our world leaders need to look at in Shakespeare and think about these things. But when you look at your arts and you see life reflected in them, what can we learn? And I put history into the arts as well, actually, because we can learn a lot from history. And so this is where we connect as human beings. Every society has an art form. Every culture has an art form. This is where we connect as people. The other thing is food. It's food, music, which is in the arts. And this is where every single culture has a version of this. So if you can't find anything, this is where we connect as people. And this is so important to us in our lives, to our nature, etc. And I think it filters across to the business world as well. And I think it's the things that we can learn from it, the things that we can learn in the way, because the arts has to be fast moving, right? It has to keep up with trends and everything else. It's very immediate, it's very box office, it's very this. And if you are not looking to the arts to see how fast they're moving and you're not keeping up with that, you're in trouble as a business. It's the same customer base.
That's fascinating.
The same customer base.
So,
right?
So you would say that there's a level of appreciation and knowledge of the arts that will actually make, not just make you a more interesting person or maybe a more well-rounded or fulfilled person, but you would make the business case for being knowledgeable about the arts. Yes,
because the arts are a business as well, right?
True.
You know, nothing can continue without having people who are interested in it, one way or another. So how the arts move on and develop, and how another thing is how some things that are more traditional become more mainstream. You can look to that to see how that is done. And it's really, really, really important because we tend to put these things in silos, but they're not in silos. And whatever whether it's music or visual arts or plays or opera, we all like something in the arts.
It's funny, I always think of your connection with the Royal Shakespeare Company and the RSC. And the last time we were together for dinner, it was in London, and I was off within a day or two, I think, to see an RSC production. If you could assign, and you referenced some of the speeches, if you could assign one or two pieces from Shakespeare to world leaders in civil society, in government, in NGOs, and also in the business world, what would you assign?
Well, oh, nice, that's a good one. So King Lear is one of my favorite plays, right? And that is, of course, about the king who thinks he's the bee's knees and the chicken's elbows.
Yeah, I like that.
And has his 3 daughters, and he decides to divide up his kingdom. And one of the daughters says, no, I'm not. The others take it, and the other one says, no, I'm not. And he's very disappointed in her because she was his favorite. And of course, it doesn't go very well, right? Does not go very well at all.
It is a tragedy after all.
It is a tragedy, and there's lots of goriness to come, yeah, and another side story. But one of the key things that I always think about King Lear, that I think it relates to power, it relates to leadership, it relates to anything, is you are not your job title, right? So he thought he would be King Lear no matter what happened, but once he gave away his power, that was, well, you can be your job title, but we're not going to follow you. We're not going to do, even his daughters took away all his retinue and everything else and treated him very badly. And so we've got to remember this, is that you're not your job title, okay? So the power that comes with it is not because of you, it's because it comes with the title. So don't think you are your job title. And I think this is for world leaders, this is for anyone in a position of leadership. And you're going to be there for a short time.
It's been lent to you. You did not create.
It's for it. So do something good with it. You are not your job title. And if you have, don't just have an important title and don't do something important. Because you have a short window of time within which to do that. Make a change, it's really, strive to make a change, it's really important. But don't think it's all about you. And I do tend to see sometimes that when people get into a position, they think it's them, just them. They're the only one. No, it's not.
Judges have occasionally been accused of this kind of thinking and lack of self-knowledge, I think. What assignment would you give to a judge? I mean, there's famously the Portia speech,
yeah.
You know, the quality of mercy is not strained, but what else?
Yeah. Do you know what? I would look at Othello and the relationship between Othello and Iago, right? And this sounds like an odd one. And I don't know which one you were going to see, Elizabeth. It was either the Hamlet or the Othello that we did at the time. But so we did a version, the RSC did a version of Othello, where they had a black actor play Iago and a black actor play Othello. So it was less about race. It was more about actually jealousy between someone who was passed over for promotion and his commander. And then that person realizing that I'm now going to use race as a factor to bring him down because I know that's his soft spot. So I'm
taking notes.
Yeah, so for what I would say, why I like that is it's a play you can read from all angles. Like you have to look at everything from all angles as a judge. And that's why I say, look at it, you think it's about one thing. But if you had, you know, two counsel in front of you arguing about what this play is about, that's what I think would be really interesting. And then there are other plays you could pick like that, but Othello is the first one that springs to mind. Is you think you know it's about one thing, but when I just said that, suddenly like, oh, I haven't thought about it that way. Depending who you cast, what you do, you open it out. And that's what I think as a judge, you need an open mind. You need to listen and you need to assess the information in front of you, and you need to be fair.
And you need to be humble.
Humble, that's it, right? Humble enough to know that I don't think I know what Othello is about. So that's what I would assign as homework.
It's really interesting, and I will reread it. Something I've found interesting over the years, and I sort of stumbled into this, I think, when my daughter was reading Shakespeare for the first time in middle school or high school. There's so many plays that when you read them again at a different stage in your life, high school, in your early 30s, maybe in your 50s, have such different meanings and lessons and contexts. It's I guess is an indication of a powerful piece of writing. I want to stay with the arts. You're the inaugural chair of a new enterprise, WOW or WOW, Women of the World Festivals. Tell us about that. What do you hope to accomplish with that?
Wow, well, wow is wow. What can I say?
Wow, okay, good, good to know.
Wow is wow. So I'm really proud to be their inaugural chair. WOW has been around for about 20 years, actually. It was a festival put on by the Jude Kelly at the South Bank. She's amazing, absolutely amazing. And it's a Women of the World Festival. And she did it originally once a year at the South Bank. Then it gained traction doing it around the world. And it's really to celebrate women and what they achieve. And it was always part of International Women's Day. And it was trying to empower women through the arts. That's the idea of it. So it's women in the arts, it's women who love the arts, it's using the art form to empower women, to allow them to spread their wings and do what they want to do. really.
How do you see that in the context of the development issues you think about at the bank? There's got to be a huge intersection. You know, it doesn't take a lot of infrastructure to sing,
Yeah,
or to make a poem in your head. How do you see opportunities for synergies between WOW and your role there and what the bank does in terms of development and empowerment?
And this is one of the reasons that I agreed to be the inaugural chair, although they're very separate things, and I'm doing it with two very different hats on, and one has not got to do with the other. But so we are big in the bank on gender equality and women's empowerment, and we interweave that into all our projects. So every single project we do, we always look at the gender aspects, the equality aspects, etc., and make sure that we've thought about that thoroughly, and we haven't forgotten anything, and we haven't left anybody behind. Do not leave anybody behind. And when you particularly in some of the more sensitive areas, so female genital mutilation, women's rights, etc., women's biological rights, etc. The arts can be very powerful in promoting the importance of that. Women filmmakers are really important. There have been some key women filmmakers who've made some very important films around violence against women and domestic violence and FGM. These things are so important, particularly when it comes to persuading other women who might think, you know, this is all okay, this is what I'm used to culturally, I don't want anything to change, to see it in a different way. And one of the most important things about change, I think, it's got to come from within. It's got to come, your own community has got to want that. And one of the biggest ways of changing things, the cultural piece, you can always change the law, but the culture has to go along with it. And people, I'll give an example, is that, you know, equal pay for women has been around for decades, but do we still get paid equally? No. So you can change the law, but the culture takes a lot longer to catch up. And it's the culture that bring the arts out. You know, at one major films on various issues, I mean, gender equality is one. Gay rights is another. When there have been some major things that change people's attitudes. And so this is where I think, particularly when it comes to vulnerable women, underserved women, this is where the arts really comes in. And another point I just want to make, which is when there is conflict, women are always at the receiving end of that. So in fragile and conflict zones, there's more violence against women. They lose a lot of rights. They lose access to education. And if, you know, young girls aren't educated, it's planned poverty for them later. So there's all of this that goes on. And particularly for refugees. And the arts and bringing those back is not the first thing that you think about when it comes to getting back on that education wheel. And this is one of the things, this is why I'm so passionate about it, because this is what spurs the world on. This is what changes the world, is the arts. And you need that from every community. You need that from everybody in this world. And if we are losing some people, both men and women, in the conflict zones to this, who could be some great artists of the future, this is a problem, I think, for everybody. And yes, we need the scientists, and we need them right now. That has been so very important, but we also need the artists. And let's not lose them in some of the places. And so let's make sure side by side, when we are rebuilding countries and countries are rebuilding themselves, they don't forget the arts and all of that. It's just very important, but it's being relegated a bit under the sciences at the moment. That does worry me a little bit.
It's such an interesting thought to imagine how an integration of these things could be mutually beneficial and not detracting. One of the things I do always at the end of a naturalization ceremony, it's typically 200, 250 new citizens from 50 or more countries, as we all sing, and I lead it, and I don't sing well, the national anthem. I suspect there's not a person on earth that doesn't hear a song in their head once a day, once a week.
Exactly.
What a thing exactly. To find in common and own. That's something to think about. So much of what you say is something to think about.
And also, if I may, Elizabeth,
please.
Reading and writing are the most important thing you have to learn. Because without reading and writing, you can't do much in this world, right? It's a basic for education. And when you get to a certain stage in your education, it's taken for granted you can read and write. Done, right? Because there's so much more you have to do with that reading and writing.
Right. It's the basic
Right?
tool.
It's basic.
It's like clean water in a community.
It's like, exactly. But where do you start with reading and writing as a child? You always start with fiction. You always start with a book. You always start with a story. So it's been the basis of everybody's education. Okay, you do not start reading the instructions in a cookbook. You do not start reading that. You start with a story.
The statutes. As much as I wish it, you don't read a constitution.
I know you don't read a constitution. You get there later in life, but
Right.
that is not where you start. We all start with the arts.
Stories. So how have you used storytelling? I find it to be so effective in court in different ways. In trainings that I do with judges, I'll use stories from my own experience. And you talk about fiction, of course, nonfiction too. Has storytelling been something that has helped you work through a situation with a group, maybe introduce an idea, get people to have a sense of ownership? Tell me about that.
Well, it's funny you should pick that up because my team call me the storyteller because I always
Oh my
tell a
story.
Yes. You're very smart, lady. No, because I always try and tell, particularly when you're having, you realize that sometimes we're talking about really complex things, and a story can really help everybody get to the same point. Let's put it that way, right? People can be coming from all different angles. A story is something that can really help everybody get to a particular point, remember why we're in the room and what we're trying to solve. And it's really difficult to give examples of those stories, but I can bring in stories from Shakespeare play and this and that. I always bring in something to say, oh, okay, this is what we're trying to achieve, or this is what we're trying to avoid. You know, there is, that's so important. And it is really important as well, I think, to make sure that others are allowed to tell their stories too, right? And we can all bring this to the table of experiences, of how you've dealt with difficult situations, how you've avoided difficult situations, how you've dealt with difficult people. So, you know, if we're going into a meeting and someone is saying, oh no, you know, this is going to be so difficult, so-and-so so set in their ways, we're not going to be able to change them. I will tell a story of an example of where that has happened. I've seen it happen, but I tell it as a story, not that you have to go in and do this. So, and this is what they did. So why don't you try and do this? So I am known as the storyteller, and I do like that. And I think it's really, really important. And I love gathering other people's stories. I always ask people, what's your story? How did you come to
That's it.
And everyone has a story, and it's not what you think it is either.
And of course, my first question in our notes was, tell us your story. It's such a critical thing, such a gentle way sometimes to make a big point, because everybody loves a story. I think a good lawyer is a good storyteller. A good business person can begin with a story to bring people in. So I don't think I knew that you had run marathons. And the last time we had dinner, I hadn't run one yet either. But what got you, I just have to ask, what made you decide back in 1997 that you were going to run London? It's a pretty big time commitment. It's a big deal. You're a busy person. How in the world did that cross your radar screen? And what would do you have any stories from that or takeaways from that you would share?
Oh, I do. So the reason, so in the London Marathon, you have your elite runners, which is not what I was at all. And you have your charity runners. And I thought, you know what, I want to raise some money for charity. There's this particular adoption charity I did some work for. And they're very small, and they didn't really have the ability to do any sort of fundraising through something like the marathon. So I just, something you can put your name in and you get it as a lottery. And I said, so they didn't have the money to sort of put in for a place for the charity, and you get so many places.
New York is similar.
Yeah. So I just put, and I thought, well, if I get a place, I'll get, and lo and behold, first time I put it in, I've got a place. So I thought, I have to win it now. I was thinking I won't get a place, so it'll be okay. I showed willing. So, and then of course people sponsor you, and I think I raised about £3,000 or £4,000, which is quite significant for the charity. So I did my training and I did all of this. And I thought, I just have to get to the end. And I remember a friend of mine who did it the previous year said, the one thing you've got to remember running a marathon is finishing and getting that medal. Just focus on that, right? Because it is a long way. And there are lots of people who don't finish. And if you don't finish, you might as well have not run the marathon because you don't get your medal. So that was something that made me think, okay, focus on the goal. Always focus on your goal, right? And how long it takes you to get there doesn't matter. When you were saying it, I'm thinking, now this sounds really impressive. Please don't ask me how long it took the first time, let alone the second time. But the point is, no, I am a marathon runner because I have run 2 marathons. That's the story. And if you don't finish, you don't get that story, right?
It's a great story. My own pitch is that anyone can do it. You need to be a little stubborn and you need to plan because it takes several months. But it's and everyone who I would always say, before I'd been in New York in 2019, I would say I have 2 goals. One is to finish and the other is to have fun, and not in that order.
Yes.
And I finished and I had fun. And I found for me, it's been a very helpful metaphor in a very sort of even subliminal way sometimes. At the beginning of the pandemic, I thought, this is like a marathon, except no one's telling us, marathon's 26.2 miles, as you know.
Yes.
And no one's telling us, is this mile 2 or is this mile 12?
Exactly.
Or is this mile 22? We don't know. They're hiding those signs, but
yes.
But we'll get there. We'll get to the end. It's not going to be, it's going to be a little hard. It does hurt. But we're getting there. We're getting there. And some of the world more than other parts, again, probably something hugely on your agenda.
And on that point as well, is that you're right. The COVID, we don't know how many miles we're running and we don't know where we are through this. But there is help along the way and there is support along the way. And when I was running, so one of the tips I got, and I give this to anyone who runs a marathon like this, put your name on your shirt.
Yes.
Yes, because people will shout out your name and give you support, yes. Complete strangers. And I remember on my first one, and because of the London Marathon, there are a lot of people, and there are a lot of people in
it's a huge deal.
It's a huge deal. As you get further along, it spreads out a little bit more. So I had a little bit more room, let's just put it this way. And I remember there were these 2 ladies who were outside their house in East London that was on the marathon route. And they had their tray of sandwiches and tea. They must have been in their early 70s. And one was a black lady, one was a white lady. And you could tell they'd been friends and neighbors forever. And they were sitting there. I was running past and I was looking a bit huffy. And they went, Sandie, we've been waiting for you for hours. Oh. And I was like, yes, I am not giving up on this now. And it was just that, sense of humor, that shouting. That is what we need during this pandemic as well. Someone to shout your name, you go.
So work with me on this. Do you think we could think about that story about your marathon as maybe a kind of metaphor for a lot of things that maybe we're thinking about doing? I'm thinking about the younger people, my own interns who are attending this program. You're on the course. There are people you don't know who are rooting for you.
Exactly.
There are people who have a cup of water for you when you least expect it, or maybe it's even Gatorade. There are 2 ladies in East London having tea and sandwiches, and maybe they're your neighbors from growing up, and they are there for you too. I think it's a beautiful image. And sometimes it can get a little discouraging, and it's good to remember, you have friends you don't know.
That is so
There's
true.
those 2 ladies on their stoop in East London.
It's so true.
And
you don't know who's cheering you along as well. That's so true, Elizabeth, because there will be people in your career who are saying yes and are putting your name forward that you don't even know. Someone put my name forward for the World Bank. I don't know who that is. Somebody did. So people are cheering you along and you don't even know. And this is really important. And in your career, this is why making a good impression and being very professional and having lots of integrity in your outlook is important, because people do notice.
What's the metaphor for putting your name on your shirt? I would say own it. Be willing to
own it.
When you walk into the conference room, which we'll get to do again someday, introduce yourself to every single person. Learn how to be the first person to hand your card to someone, right?
Yes, exactly. And be your authentic self. That's your metaphor as well. This is me. If you don't like it, there'll be plenty of other people who will.
That's right.
It's a big marathon. It's a big race. There are lots of other people, but there'll be the two ladies.
If you're not
on the
going to
street
cheer for
waiting
me, I'm
you.
going to find someone who is.
Yeah, and there will be someone. But make sure they know your name.
But make sure they know your name. It's funny, when I ran New York, I had a T-shirt on from a program years ago. I helped start to teach high school kids about the Constitution and how it, what it should mean to them. And so I had a red, white, and blue shirt that said Constitution Workers. And people would shout out, "Go Constitution," which, you know what? Wasn't
That's
as good
great.
as go Liz, but it was working for me. We have some questions and I want to get to them first.
Sure.
I want to thank Dr. Abubakar, who sends the following question, or Dr. Paul. Can you please tell us a bit about the initiative you launched, getting law societies and bar associations over the world to interact in order to advance the rule of law and contribute to socioeconomic development in developing countries? That's a big question. Tell us about
it's a great question.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you. And I think I know who you are, by the way. So hello. A very good friend of mine, Penelope Warren, who is on the board of the Law Society, and I had a chat in DC a few years ago. And we came up with this idea of, well, what if we got all the law societies and bar associations in the world to form a compact to promote SDG 16, the rule of law, because we should be the lawyers' SDG. And we feel the lawyers have been—
And the judges.
And the judges, absolutely, SDG. This is the one thing we can all band together and promote. And because of the bank being involved in a non-political way, who can say the rule of law and access to justice is not a good thing? So we've been getting together, and so the American Bar Association, the Paris Bar, is now part of this compact that we put together that's sponsored by the bank and the Law Society. And we are now going to, we've moved this along quite a bit. We're going to do some research papers. We're going to put some work out there on the rule of law, access to justice, and to information share, the knowledge share, to eventually promote the rule of law across the world, because you don't want that to slip. You do not want that to slip. It's so very, very important. But there hasn't been anything like that on this scale before, with this kind of, I wouldn't say development focus, that is wrong, but this focus for everybody to come together in this way behind SDG 16 and really promote this. I think other professions have been, the finance profession has been really good in doing things like this. The legal profession, because I think we train so differently in different places, we are a little bit more sort of not divided, but I think we're not as cohesive. But we can be, because we all should believe in that. And to give lawyers, to bring back the passion of why we all became lawyers and judges in the first place.
One of the things I like to say when I have the chance to speak to brand new lawyers is, please, I beg you on my knees, do not have less excitement, lower expectations for your professional satisfaction and the difference you can make now that you're a lawyer than you did when you were thinking about applying to law school, because you can see that sometimes. I worry about it. Speaking of new lawyers or law students, I'd like to turn to our interns, Nur Ishaidat and Lindsay Scoresby. Please turn on your cameras, my friends. Thank you so much. Nur, you both have questions for Sandie. Nur, I'd like you to go first with your first question. Over to you. Unmute. Thank you.
Thank you for your introduction, Judge Stong. Hello, Sandie. I have one question for you. Thank you for being here. You once mentioned that what is the point of an important job if you don't do important work? And the World Bank and the General Counsel do a lot of important work. What, in your opinion, is the most important aspect of your job?
Oh, so I think the most, well, let me just go back a bit. I am paid to do a certain job, and I better do that, and I better do that well. Over and above that, the most important thing, I think, in my job is to use my voice. So, as I said before, going back to my King Lear analogy, with the title and with the power, people will ask you to do things. People will want to talk to you. So make sure you use that as a real opportunity to give voice to others who don't have a voice. I once went on a trip. I met some amazing women in rural Senegal, and they were doing some amazing work around women's empowerment. And I remember there was this really formidable woman who I was so scared of and very impressed by at the same time, who said, you know, you are the General Counsel of the World Bank. What are you doing to voice some of the issues of women? You have a voice, you better use it. And I was thinking, yeah, you're absolutely right. So what I think the most important thing is, Noor, is that I will talk about issues around women's empowerment, violence against women. That's when I'm asked to talk, I bring that into everything, because I have that voice where, you know, you're all sitting here now, not that you have to listen because you could be doing something else, but I do have that. I'm lucky enough that because of the job I do, I can bring that into the things I say and weave that into everything. And that is the most important thing I can do, is use the voice and agency I have to make women's lives better, on top of the day job I'm paid to do, which has a lot of other things I need to do.
One or two. It's sweet to hear the story that you were called out when you were in Senegal. Like almost as if everyone has a stake in your success, which is like,
yes,
like those people along the path of the marathon, right? Yes. Lindsay, I know you have a question as well. Let's hear from you.
Yes, thank you so much, Judge Stong, and thank you, Sandie, for being here. I have found everything that you've said to be so inspiring. And as kind of, you know, as part of your parting remarks, I am really curious. We talked a little bit earlier about your, you know, your goal for resiliency and making sure that young professionals are setting the bar high. And I have a question that, you know, as a woman of color in leadership, what advice would you give to starting professionals who struggle with glass ceilings in their own communities? And ultimately, what strengthened your resolve to break through your own personal glass ceiling to, you know, achieve those goals?
Thank you, Lindsay. This is such an important question that we must never forget. Is there glass ceilings everywhere? It's not just a glass ceiling in the world at large, which is difficult enough, thank you very much. But within your own communities, there may be things like that, that it's very difficult. Community and family are so important to everybody. And leaving that behind, which people shouldn't have to do, can be difficult. But, you know, it goes back, you can bring people along with you, okay? And that's what, so don't be afraid to do it, ever. Because you can always find a new community should you need it. There's enough people in this world. So don't let anything hold you back from what you really want to do. And particularly for women where, you know, people may say to you, no, you can't do that, you can't do this, you shouldn't do this, or if you do this, this will happen. And the hardest thing for anybody is to feel that you will find yourself drifting apart from your family. That's the hardest thing, let's face it, this is the hardest thing. So if you take that step to do something different, that gulf starts to appear. But it's making sure that you manage that, you're aware of it, and you bring them along with you. And there is nothing wrong, and I mean, so many communities do this, of being one thing in one community and being a more traditional in another, or whatever it is you have to do. I'm super cool with that. So long as you're authentic self in both pieces, right? So if there are things you want to change, things you want to bring along, and the most important thing here, Lindsay, is your role model for other young girls. Because if you don't do it, you're not encouraging other young girls to do it. How you do it, with respect and with dignity, and don't trash your old community either, please, please, please. But you know, and then you'll go to some other place and you think, oh my God, they could learn so much. And that's the other thing, we could learn so much from so many different communities, particularly how families stay together and stick together, that there is no better side, there is only different. But it's what you want and what you want to achieve. So your gender, your race, your religion should never hold you back from anything. But if you get there, please do not hold back from changing where you get to as well. And I'll give you an example. I used to do some work for the Premier League a while back. And I remember one of the football teams, I won't say which one, but one of the Premier League football teams realized that they had lots of female Muslim fans who love coming to the ground. So they did a hijab in the football colours. We should do more of stuff like that. right? Where we blend in different things and not say this is good, this is bad, but you never should hold women back from doing what they want to do and what they want to achieve. But let's be imaginative and creative in the way that we do that. But understand as well, particularly when it comes to universities, I think that's a really important thing. That's the big gap for most people, is that bit where you leave home and you go to university and you're making your own life. Is some people feel that takes them so far away from their families, and then there has to be something different to fit in. And that's some work I would like to do, is allowing everybody to be their authentic self wherever they go, but to develop as we all do and we all change as the world does around us. Does that answer your question? Good.
And with the story, of course, it reminds me of something I have talked about, you've written about from time to time, which it comes from a phrase that's very common in US sort of professional commentaries, the idea of work-life balance. And I've always struggled with this, not for the reason you think, but because in a balance, what happens? One pan goes up, the other goes down. I don't like that. That's not true for me. And I've encouraged people to think, I've tried to encourage people to think about, and I've given myself permission to think about work-life integration.
Yes.
Authentic, so that you are who you are at home, in your neighborhood, in your volunteer life, in your school meetings, in when you go to church or synagogue or temple or a hike in the woods, and of course at your desk, at the podium, on the bench, running the meeting. Work-life integration. One is not at the expense of the other, and it's just the same as the concept of having the kind of integrity and authenticity, giving yourself permission to have that. Actually, I'm smiling because I'm looking at a couch pillow of Ruth Bader Ginsburg on my couch. I hope every judge has a couch pillow with their favorite justice. Work-life integration. We have one more question in the Q&A, which is from John Taylor. Thank you, Mr. Taylor. With some nice compliments to you. And what should the World Bank do that it is not doing to address global poverty? We're almost out of time, so you can take that one on at whatever level of generality resonates with you.
That's a gift of a question, John. Hi, John. How are you? Hope you're well. So I would say, and I would say this, and I'm going to say it because I can, we could do so much more when it comes to rule of law and access to justice. So we do have a very good governance team, right? That looks at this and is trying to do more. But I think we see post the pandemic, this is going to be even more important than it was before. And the bank is a wonderful place. Majority of those are economists, and sort of so going away. I would train economists in law and rule of law a little bit more than we do, because I've noticed this is a gap in their training actually, because I think economics is considered a science when you go to the university, or certainly in the UK. I think a little bit more the humanities in the economist training would be really good, because economists are at the top of all of these things, making really big policy decisions. And I do sometimes think that they're not as familiar with some of these things that are so important to cementing all these changes. So if we want good development outcomes, you want them to be sustainable, you want them to be able to stick. And without a good system of rule of law, anti-corruption, all of this is where you get problems. Good governance, good rule of law, good access to justice, fair access to justice in a modern world is really important. One of the projects I'm very proud of the World Bank for doing were mobile courts in Tanzania. So literally a judge in a van. We'd go to the rural areas, you could book online, and the judge or the magistrate would come to you and would come to, so you didn't have to then spend a month's salary and a very long trek to get to the courthouse, because we actually say the phrase going to court. It's like you go to school. But we now know that actually the courts and the schools have come to us. And I think we have to think a little bit more broadly about access to justice and a little bit less. And I think COVID has helped us with that. Some things we'd never imagined doing or wouldn't like doing, we have now learned to do. So these mobile courts have been brilliant. And guess what? Women have had more access to justice as a result, because they're often the ones in the rural areas who can't get to the court, maybe can't leave children behind, caring responsibilities. So the courts come to them. So that I use that as and more projects like that. And that's something the whole world can benefit from. And you can do that in Tanzania, you can do that in Peru, you can do that anywhere you want. And it is very cheap, it is very affordable. And works in terms of bang for your buck. You get more with something like that than you do with building a new courthouse.
There you go, return on investment. There's the business training. I think if anything is clear from so many wonderful stories you've told and points you've made, it's how much we have to learn from each other, how much in the arts we have to learn, in finance, in law, in humanity. I think it's better than a seamless web. It's a tapestry that you're describing.
And I should just add, Elizabeth, so I don't get into trouble, is I also think that lawyers could do some more, could learn a little bit more that the economists learn as well.
As you were saying that, I was reminded of a training that I participated in back in the before times in December of 2019, just before everything changed, where the objective was to give a basic grounding in economic principles to judges.
Yes.
The more that people can be, more that
Exactly.
people in these settings can talk to, hear from each other. And in kind of a mutual exchange, I think there's a tremendous, I'd love to work on something like that, actually. There's tremendous opportunity there. And I'm thinking that, here in New York City, where there's so much of an arts community, anywhere in the world, I don't think anyone goes a day without having a song in their head. And that may be my last question for you. What's the song in your head most days? How much we have to learn from each other. But that'll be my last question, except for any parting advice you'd like to share. But what is the song in your head most days, my friend?
Well, I think the song in my head right now, and this may be a song some people will know and others won't know. And if you don't know it, go on Spotify or Apple, wherever.
Look it up.
So there is a song by a group, it's an old one now, called Orange Juice, which is Rip It Up and Start Again. It's just a great tune. It's very buzzy, but if you're thinking, and I was thinking about it at a particular time when I was like, oh, I think I've made a mistake on this one, and then the song "Rip It Up and Start Again," and there's some great lyrics in that I won't go through right now, but it's really, really good. So "Rip It Up and Start Again" is in my current mindset I'm listening to.
I don't know it, but I'm going to look it up as soon as we finish.
And it will be when I write this, because I want to write a book on leadership at some point, and it will be one of the chapters called "Rip It Up and Start Again."
And it will be a poem. The chapter that I would write following that is something I learned early on as a judge. You can fix it with a pen. Rip it up and start again. You can fix it with a pen.
Okay, that is so true.
Good.
You can fix it with a pen.
Sandie, I miss you horribly. It has been wonderful to spend this hour with you. You're simply the best. There's 100 more questions I'd love to ask you. I'll leave with this. If you had one last nugget to share, story, advice, poem, whatever it is, what would it be?
It would be, I can is more important than IQ.
I like that. All right.
An I can attitude will get you very, very far.
There is no, I feel like I'm living proof of that. Who needs talent, right? Thank you again. Camilla, I think you have some closing observations to make of an administrative nature. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
I'm going to float through the rest of the day and the week after spending this time with you. Over to Camilla.
All right, thank you so much, Sandie. That was wonderful. And Elizabeth, I'm obviously going to go and listen to that song right now, and encourage everyone I know to watch this session. So thank you both for taking the time. I really appreciate it. So our next session is not until after the summer. It's on carbon trading, so join us if you can. I'd like to thank FTI Consulting, McCann Fitzgerald and Travis Smith for sponsoring this series of Prime Time. And if you're interested in sponsoring a future event, please just get in touch. Finally, Prime Finance accepts donations through Friends of Prime to support its work. If you'd like to make a donation or to find out more, please contact the Secretariat using the details showing in the chat box. And other than that, thank you so much, all of you, for your time. All right, thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Sandie, keep in touch. Safe travels home. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everybody.